Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave, and I am your man behind the screen. Sometimes, when home stops feeling like home, when your life goes just a little bit crazy, you need to leave for a while. You need to find that other place that feels like home. Not everyone's lucky enough to know where that is or be able to get to it if they do. But luckily for me, I managed to do that today. And I am glad for it, because I can't think of a better way to start the first day of what is the closest thing to a vacation that I've gotten in the last more than a year and a half than traveling back to the town that I spent probably the most formative years of my childhood in, and just spending a bit of time up here. Quick announcement before we get into today's video. The most recent episode of Phoenix Rising is now live over on Webtoon, so go ahead, open up that link in the description box below, and give a read to what is the single biggest episode of Phoenix Rising that Hare and I have ever done. And once again, as usual, she just continues to push her limits as an artist, and, well, you know, it's a good time to start reading. We're climbing into our next big climactic moment, and yeah, if you haven't read yet, now's a good time to start. We will be taking a brief hiatus for the month, although she and I are going to be attempting to work on another summer special. We usually tend to do this around the time for the anniversary of the comic, and the third anniversary for Phoenix Rising is, I believe, coming up. I believe it's actually coming up this next month. So, that's pretty exciting. Now, today, which is the Friday before Memorial Day 2021, I was originally planning to put up my next installment of Times I Fucked Up as a GM. I finally got those recorded. They're finally ready to go. Well, the third one's recorded. I still need to edit everything together, but that usually doesn't take super long. Still, I was planning on putting that up today, but I think I'm going to change things around a little bit and actually schedule that for next weekend, since I've just sort of got a little idea on the brain today. This idea came about from a very brief conversation that I had with Grimjim and the OGGM that came about because of a product that Grim published on his website. A supplement for, well, not really a supplement, but an adventure and setting that is tentatively, and I suppose you could say technically, for his game Actual Fucking Monsters, although it's a loose technicality. It's a technicality in the sense that the creatures and challenges within this module are presented with stats for Actual Fucking Monsters, but the module itself is meant to be completely system agnostic. If you've got a system that can support it, no matter what that system is, it can be ported to that system. And the OGGM brought up an interesting question in the little shared Discord group that we're all a part of. When you have a systemless module, or a systemless game, how do you determine the difficulty for your players? And that's something that I've been dealing with a lot over the last couple of years, as I myself have moved more and more away from running 5th edition and more towards running other games, most of which do not have challenge ratings the way Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder does. Most of the games I run, in fact, probably at this point now, the plurality of them, oftentimes involve me having to create my own creatures and monsters and having to tweak things very much on the fly. And one of the means that I have come up with to help myself get a better understanding of these different systems. Sorry about that strangeness to the voice, just taking a little bit of a stretch there. One of the means that I've came up with is a couple of one-shot adventures that I've designed, which have some fairly different goals and push some fairly different mechanical limits and stylistic limits, to see which game systems out there in terms of tabletop games are the best for handling the type of games and style of games that I like to run, as well as the way I like to run them. And that was to create a couple of system-agnostic one-shot adventures. And I have used these adventures multiple times across multiple systems, one many more times than others, and they've been incredibly insightful for me in terms of figuring out what kind of systems work well for me and my style of play, but in terms of the particular question at hand, that being, how do you determine challenge for your players and difficulty for your players with a systemless game or a systemless module? Insights on how exactly to do that, what you need to do, what is expected of you, what challenges will you face there. The short answer to the question is, there is no clear-cut method. There is no gauge in place. There is no challenge rating. None of that exists for this. Even if you're using something like D&D that does use challenge ratings, yeah, you can kind of import that and reskin monsters and things like that, but it's not going to be an exact science, particularly with 5th edition. We've discussed on this channel multiple times already how badly Wizards flubbed their challenge ratings in 5th edition and how inaccurate they really are. So we won't get into that again, but even with systems that do use challenge ratings, they don't end up helping very much in a systemless or a system-agnostic module. Generally speaking, that sort of thing falls a whole hell of a lot more towards GM fiat than anything else. It's going to be a game of feeling it out. There is no strict set system for putting that in place. And so because of that fact, certain systems are naturally going to work better with a system-agnostic module than others. Among the ones that I ran my primary module on, which actually you can see the first time I ever ran this module here on this channel. I ran it as part of my, or as the main portion of my 100 subscriber special, like, God, what was that, 3 years ago now? Not quite 3 years ago now. It couldn't have been quite 3 years ago because we had already started publishing Phoenix Rising, I believe, before I started the channel. But I don't know. Like I've mentioned in the past, my sense of time is it's a little bit screwy right now. But regardless of that, the 100 subscriber special live play that I have on this channel was the very module that I have used most of all as this introduction into both the style of game that I like to make and run and the style of GMing that I like to engage with. So, I have found that of the 4 systems that I have run this module in, those systems being 5th edition, Savage Worlds, Professor Dungeon Master's game Deathbringer, Professor Dungeon Master, of course, from the channel Dungeon Craft, and then Questing Beasts game Maze Rats. Of those 4, 5th edition was the least compatible by far, because the way 5th edition functions, the way the challenge ratings work, the way all those determinations work, and just generally speaking, the way that game tends to work, the amount of work that I had to put in just to get everything ready, even with trying to use reskinning to make things easier, was far too much. It was simply far too much. Now, that's not going to be the case for everybody. Certain systems, certain modules are going to be easier to work with reskinning than others. This particular one that I wrote, it didn't end up working as well for that as I had initially hoped, because one of my original ideas was to make it something that could be run fairly easily in 5th edition, and, well, when I tested that, no, that ended up not being the case. However, the other 3, Deathbringer, Maze Rats, Savage Worlds, none of which use challenge ratings, although Deathbringer certainly can, since it is a derivative of Dungeons & Dragons. It's an OSR derivative. But none of those are built with challenge ratings specifically in mind. You don't have to use challenge rating. In Savage Worlds and Maze Rats, challenge ratings flat out do not exist. So how do you determine the difficulty then? Well, you have to feel it out. You have to experiment. You have to try to develop a sort of sixth sense understanding of that. And that is something that with experience and time, you will begin to develop. But what if you're not experienced? What if you have a systemless module and you don't really have that sixth sense yet? You're new to game mastering, dungeon mastering. You're new to setting up adventures and all that stuff. What then? Well, my first bit of advice in that particular case would be, to be entirely honest, don't run a system agnostic module, because you're not ready for those particular challenges yet. System agnostic modules, or systemless modules, these are the kind of things that are very, very useful for experienced GMs who just want to be able to grab something, use it quickly, and just have it there and be able to modify things on the fly. GMs who are experienced in that, who have developed that skill over the year, they're going to find a lot more use out of these things than less experienced GMs will. For less experienced game masters, particularly with specific games, I would say get a better handle of running your game as is first. Don't worry about picking up some quick-made adventure, single-page, system-agnostic adventure and trying to modify that to fit your game yet. Build your own simple adventures first, or grab simple adventure modules that are built for the game. My personal recommendation would be maybe run an introductory module or two. Give a couple runs with that. Get some practice with something to introduce you to the mechanics of the game. This is if you're particularly new. But if your experience is, basically if you're new or your experience is minimal, stick to running adventures that are specifically built for the game, and then build your own adventures specific for the game. Get your experience there first, because building a system agnostic adventure, running a system agnostic adventure, a lot of the same kind of rules apply. Where the difference falls in is how you're going to end up determining the difficulty, because a lot of those decisions are going to have to be made on the fly. A lot of times, depending especially on the kind of game that you're trying to run and the sort of feel that you're trying to give, you may have to tweak things back or forward depending on the situation as it falls. A certain enemy is turning out to be too strong, well, you're going to have to dial the difficulty back a little bit if you think that it's going to be too much of a challenge for your players based on the kind of game you're trying to run. For example, if you're trying to run some high fantasy heroics and it's turning out that, oh, well, the boss monster that I've put in, or the boss encounter, final encounter I've put in for this particular dungeon, I dialed the enemy's health and strength a little bit too high. The threat of death is a little bit too high for the style of adventure I'm trying to run. Let me pull back a little bit on this, and then behind the scenes you make some alterations, you know. Vice versa, if you're trying to run something a lot more gritty and dangerous, and oh, well, crap, it's turning out that the players are doing a little bit too good of a job taking out my monsters, taking out my encounters, and just slaughtering their way through everything with minimal effort, well, in that case, All right, it's time to dial the numbers for your monsters up. It's time to dial the challenge up. Throw a couple extra creatures in there. Ramp up the challenge and ramp up the danger in that sense. This is something you're going to run into in standard adventures as well. Anything that's built specific for your game. Any pre-made adventure, really. You're going to run into this scenario, even your own. You're going to run into scenarios where you do need to kind of alter things on the fly. It's inevitable. It will always happen. The biggest difference between something that's made specifically for a certain game, though, and something that's made to be system agnostic, to be slotted into just about any game as long as the setting and style fit well enough for it to feasibly work, is that a system agnostic game, you will be doing this constantly. At least in my experiences. Dread from the Deeps, which is the one that I mentioned that I made for myself, like I said, I've run multiple times already. I believe at this point I've run it 5, actually it might now even be 6 times. Every single time, the challenges within it have turned out different. The approach I've had to take with it has been different. I've had to tweak things every single time I've run it to fit the kind of challenge that I wanted to fit, to give the players the kind of experience I wanted to give them, and so on and so forth. This will always happen, as I said, with pre-published adventure paths. You're never going to avoid this. And a general rule of thumb with any pre-published adventure path, be it system agnostic or not, is that you, as the GM, want to read the entire thing ahead of time. Read all of it. All of it. Read it cover to cover, to gain at least some understanding of what's in there. And then, in the prep for your sessions, and the prep for the portions of it that you're going to run, read that ahead of time again, and start figuring out what are some of the problem elements that I think I might need to change. And again, this is something that you're also going to get with experience. You'll start to recognize more of those problem elements. But system agnostic adventure paths, you're going to run into this more often than I think you will with system specific ones. But not in the same way. With a system specific adventure path, you could run into a situation, let's say, for example, that you've got an encounter with a creature and, oh, well, you're looking at the numbers, you've got enough experience from having played that you could sort of see the red flag starting to form in your head. Oh, they sort of dialed this monster up a little bit too high for the level that the party is at when they encounter it. This monster is a lot more likely to kill the players than the players are to kill it. The encounter's not going to be a reasonable challenge, you know. And if the expectation of the adventure path is that, oh, well, the players need to kill this monster to complete this portion, well, having it be dialed up too high is going to work directly against that. So you've got to tweak things. Some encounters are just poorly designed and wouldn't be fun, so you've got to tweak them. You start to notice red flags the more experience you get. The more times you encounter issues and problems within system-specific adventures, you will start to see those same red flags come up with the system-agnostic ones. The tricky thing with the system-agnostic adventures, though, is that it's more difficult to spot some of those red flags ahead of time because you don't have pre-made stats. You don't have fully pre-formulated encounters. You have the basics for guidelines to those encounters. Something to sort of spark your imagination to help you craft that encounter. But to craft that encounter, you need to have an understanding of what does and does not work for the types of games that you like to play and you like to run, and the way you like to run them. Which means you need experience. And that's ultimately the point I'm kind of getting to at the end. For a system-agnostic adventure, to effectively gauge the sort of challenge you can present to your players, you need to understand the types of games you like to play and run, and the types of games that your players like to play in. You need to gain experience with how to run those games, how to deal with those challenges, and how to do that stuff in the moment. Because these decisions, by and large, for system-agnostic adventures are ones you're going to have to make on the fly. Or at least that's what my experiences with this have told me. System-agnostic adventures are all over the place out there on the internet. There are literally thousands, possibly even millions of them. There are entire blogs and sometimes even entire websites fully dedicated to making these things. There are creators within the hobby whose careers are built around designing adventures to be used with any system. They're an incredibly useful tool, but we have to understand how to use them properly. So, in the interest of understanding the many different ways in which we can use these properly, I want to hear from you guys. What are some system-agnostic adventures that you've run? What are some of the problems and challenges you've run into trying to run adventures like these? If you haven't run adventures like these, are you interested in running adventures like these? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below, and as usual, friends and gamers of all stripes, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen. Please, while you're down below, be sure to leave a like on the video if you like what I have to say here, subscribe if you'd like to hear more, and share the video around if there's people that you think would be interested in hearing what I have to say. Open up the description box down below to follow me on my social media presences. Minds.com in particular is by far the best place to follow me, as that is the place where I back up all of my content now. So you will find secondary uploads for all of my videos over on Minds. I am also considering, when things get a bit more stable and I actually have some more free time to do so, yes, new management coming in has been a huge boon here at the store, but that boon only means so much when you're still two guys being slammed with the work of 4 to 5. So, still big challenges going on in the day job. But I am planning at some point in the near-ish future to start posting Minds exclusive content. Probably something along the likes of articles and blogs, and maybe even sharing links to adventure paths or adventure ideas, things like that. We'll all see how that goes. This is an idea that's very early on in its inception. Once again, please give a look at Phoenix Rising, my webtoon, which you can find linked down below in the description box as well. And now, with that end of the road preamble said and done, friends and gamers of all stripes, once again, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen. And I do hope that you have a lovely Memorial Day weekend, a lovely Memorial Day holiday if you're living in the US, and please do not forget that in the world of tabletop games, you do not want to just sit back and watch, but get in there and game.